But if you're not vulnerable enough to ask for help when you need it, you will never progress to the level that you need to be at.
Welcome to the Strong Dad Show with your host, Adam Lloyd. Together, we are stronger.
Guys, welcome back to the Strong Dad Show. And today we've got a member interview. We've got a guest from the Strong Dads community. Shawn Hendron is on the Strong Dad Show. Firefighter, father, calling in from the USA. Shawn, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
And I got to start by saying that Shawn has been involved with the Strong Dads community for a while now. And he is, even from me personally, I see him as a pivotal member of the Strong Dads movement. And I couldn't really imagine everything we're doing with Strong Dads at the moment without you, Shawn, because I know you're inspiring a lot of guys. I know with the recent hunt that you did, that inspired a lot of guys. I've had a lot of offline conversations and people are like, if the world falls apart, I'm going with Shawn. You know, I'm flying over and I'm living with Shawn. He'll provide and protect. And when we look at what it means to be a strong dad, that whole element of providing, protecting, leading, that is what Shawn embodies. So, Shawn, if you want to give yourself a bit of an intro, buddy.
Sure. So my name's Shawn Hendron. I'm from Cherville, Indiana, which we're in the United States. We are right outside of Chicago. So we always say Chicago because everybody kind of can tie to Chicago, but we're about 40 minutes south in Indiana. I'm a career firefighter in Gary, Indiana. I've been there for my 13th year. I started the fire service in 2006, kind of bounced around part-time / full-time departments for a while. My past, I have some childhood trauma that kind of, we'll talk about later, that kind of inspires me to believe in your community and everybody that, listens to you. And, it's just, I'm a strong believer in everything you're doing. And I have a wife, I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and just, living life, getting through, trying to be as fit and strong and as best of a man and a provider that I can be.
Oh, I love that, buddy. I love that. So you touched on it. Take me back then to the earlier years where you've mentioned the words childhood trauma. I know you've been through a bit in your past. No doubt there's a lot of guys listening in who've been through some elements of trauma or just difficulty. But yeah, take us back to your childhood. Where did you grow up? What was it like?
So I grew up in pretty much the same area that I live now. It was Munster, which is a town like 2 towns over. It's probably about a 10-minute drive from where I live now. I'm the middle child. I have an older brother and a younger brother, and we are all exactly 2 years apart. Growing up together, my dad was an operating engineer, heavy equipment operator. Going back, I mean, I'd say standard childhood probably until, we started realizing like just certain things that would happen around the house. Like Saturday mornings, I remember like my older brother and me, we would always go grocery shopping with my dad. And those were, moments that like I really cherished because it was like, just the boys going out, doing stuff. But then we finally started to notice, I'd say when I was maybe 6, my older brother noticed it more, but it would always be like, he'd always be getting flowers or like, there was always like this like underlying thing that we were like, what's going on? And then as we got older, my room was right next to my parents' room. So I just remember there'd always be, my dad would get off work. He'd, first thing he'd do, grab a beer. He'd always have the fridge on one side was just stocked full of beer. And I just remember he would drink. And then I'd hear like the yelling, I'd hear thuds. Uh, then I think that goes back into like the flowers. It would be like, this cycle of abuse where, I'd see my mom crying. She'd be like, sometimes there'd be bruises on her. One time I remember there was one on her face that we noticed that like she was trying to hide. And, we started noticing this. And so it just kind of spiraled on, got to the point where the biggest, I guess, issue was one time my older brother tried, my dad was yelling. We were upstairs. My brother came down. And all I remember was he tried to, like, I guess, step up and, defend my mom. And my dad threw him. And he like threw, I just remember hearing the thud and seeing him, then he was crying. And then it just kind of led back to that cycle. Next day, it's like my dad's apologizing, pretending like something never happened, and this went on until, say, I was 8 years old when, and, there were multiple incidents of, my room was right next stairs, like I said. So you'd hear the yelling, you'd hear the thud, and you'd hear my mom crying. I just remember like just kind of burying my head in the pillow, just like, make it stop. And so then finally, um, my mom finally, I give her a lot of credit because she finally put her foot down to break the cycle. And so she filed for divorce, which then led to a restraining order, which then led to my dad. It was court ordered therapy that he had to go to. So I remember, I mean, there's a lot of little things here and there, but basically he went to therapy and he would always like, from what I remember, he would always like play the know what to say to get out of the therapy. And then
Mm.
he'd come back and then, he'd call my brothers or write us, notes and just say how, basically he's never done anything wrong. It was always my mom that was the problem. And, he
Massive
brought up,
denial.
yeah, just all these things. And, and that kind of leads to, today, like, I've tried to reach out to him sometimes. And it's just that, even if, and I said to him one time in an email, it was like, Dad, I'm not trying to, hang you here. But even if you could say, I've done some things that I'm not proud of, but let's put it behind us and move on. And it's kind of led to, this up and down struggle with myself going through therapy. We had court ordered therapy when we were children. I remember a few times it was like I would refuse to talk because I was just like this stubborn, like just I can get through this on my own. Like I can be tough, I can do it. I remember countless sessions just sitting there like with the therapist. Her name was Elizabeth. And I would just like almost stare at the wall. And, she's like, you can say something, you can do this. And yeah, and I was just like, then I finally got out. I just felt like I was so like weak and I wasn't able to like defend myself or do anything. And so I remember one time she said something like, when you feel these feelings, like there's positive ways that you can express them. And then that's where like the first thing of fitness came in. I think I was like 10. And she's like, if you can't go to the gym or you can't do something and you feel like, weak, it was something like, she's like, the floor's there. And then I just thought, I'll just start doing push-ups, so that was kind of like my coping thing for a while. Like I would get really upset. I would, like have this anger and like, want to like fight and I couldn't do anything about it. So I would just hit the floor and, basically do push-ups until I couldn't push up anymore. And that just kind of was my way of dealing with it. And, I think the biggest trauma that we experienced was I remember my brothers and I, we started a lawn service. Started where the neighbor next door, her husband passed away, and we started mowing her grass. Well, then we started mowing all these other neighbors' lawns, and so it got to the point where we were getting so big we had to get a truck. So we
Wow.
bought a truck, and then we started going around the neighborhood, and neither one of us could drive yet. So our grandpa would come and he would, sit in the truck and drive us and we'd do our lawns. And I remember one day he picked us up from school. We came home and we were getting ready to just load up and, start doing our lawns. And our dad just got released from, it was Logansport, Indiana. It was a mental, therapy center that was court ordered. And I had to been maybe 11 and his car was in the driveway. And there was a restraining order against him because we were all afraid of him. I remember, he would do things like, just call my mom repeatedly and like call the house line and then just hang up. And, and like, just so we're in like this fear and this confusion. And then we saw the car and at first, like part of me was happy, cause I mean, he's my dad, but then we knew there was a restraining order. So my grandpa gets out, looks, the restraining order is sitting on the passenger seat of his car, opened, like, with the judge signed in and everything, and he's nowhere to be found. So my grandpa, walks around the house. He's like, stay in the car. Me and my brothers are sitting in his car, like, what's going on? What's up with this? And then he comes to the back of the house where it was actually my oldest brother he was staying the downstairs. It was a tri-level. And so what my dad had done is broken into the house from my brother's room, crawled in, and he was up in his room, and he tried to overdose and commit suicide. So my grandpa found him, called 911, and this kind of leads to my career choice as well. That was my first experience with like, the ambulance, the fire department. They all show up. We're still not really sure what's going on, but I remember seeing them carrying him out of the house and then on the cot, and there was one of the medics on him working him, and he was unconscious. I mean, I thought he was dead. And they were able to, save his life, bring him back. And then, from there on, just the fear and just like, we just had no clue, our like world like kind of fell apart. And so we would have to go to court every now and then to, talk to the judge about visitation. Our therapists were encouraging us. I wasn't ready for it at all. And so, but my dad, through the divorce, because it wasn't even finalized yet, was, put in a narrative, and he got a really good attorney, that pled his case that we were just brainwashed, we were minors. He still did nothing wrong. And so we had to physically, all this went on for some time, and we had to go, took a lot of therapy for us, but we had to go in front of the judge and in the front of the court actually, tell the judge that we don't want to see our dad.
Which age was that? How old was you?
I think I was probably 11.
Wow, that is a lot to ask, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was just, and like, looking back, um, it's really, it's like in some of the therapists I've been through, and like I still go to this day, like, they're say like I have some guilt in that, but dealing with it, it's come to the point where, like the realization that when you're a child or, a young adolescent, to make that decision, like your world doesn't even, I mean, that's like adult decisions to make, but it went into, all the fear and all the things and the trauma of, seeing him, um, try to commit suicide.
That is intense. And for those of you who are listening into the podcast and not watching it, it's clear that Shawn turned his trauma into push-ups, because I'm just going to say his chest is popping in that t-shirt. He's got a hell of a chest on him, but that's a lot, man. That is so much to go through. And like you said, it's not just the trauma of that upbringing and hearing your mother get hurt and how that clearly like impacted you when you didn't feel strong enough to protect yourself, etc. But then continuing on with that cycle. So like you said, your dad breaking in to try and commit overdose in your family home, knowing that one of you was going to find him if he was successful, and having to stand up in court. That is a lot to process. But I just want to, you mentioned earlier on that every now and then you reach out to him, or you send him an email, or you write to him. Why do you do that? What's within you? Are you trying to mend a relationship? Are you trying to close a door? What are you trying to do?
So, I mean, I feel like I've always been the type of person, I mean, from, some of the therapy I've went through and some of the things like, I need to like have closure. And that's one of the bigger, when we get into like the fire department, it's one of the challenges with like that I had with working on the ambulance is, you go to these scenes and, you find, a shooting person or, somebody in this traumatic situation. You do all this work in, this short period of time, drop them at the hospital, and then you don't know if they live, they died, you barely ever see them again. And so I think that this happened from recently where I've had this, like, I guess, reflection of, from all this stuff from work and, like trying to have some like emotional battles within myself and some even spiritual battles of, like, um, I'm a strong believer in God. And I think that honor thy father. And it comes to, he's old and, I don't think that he should be crucified for his poor, his health issues that he had. I think he made some terrible decisions, but, to have that closure of, he's still my father. And, kind of it's led into like my wife. I love my wife. I love my family. She's Italian. They have this big, happy Italian family. And like seeing, with my kids, that's what kind of made me open up the door. Like they've never met him. And personally, it's been a battle. My wife and I talk about it. So like her strength in family, like kind of pushes me to think, is there some way that I can mend this? But then also, with how he's been in the, when I send these emails, or like one time he actually lives relatively close to us. And the one time I literally was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go to his house. So I went, I knocked on the door. I mean, it was like kind of a surprise. It may not have been the best decision, for his mental health, but like for me, it was like I just needed to like physically see him and, have like a man to man conversation, which then led to the lady he's staying with is this lady that he met when he was at one of the mental hospitals. And he got into a church and like, they all just like kind of believed his side of the story. And so when I walked in there, I never even knew her. And she's like jumping on me right away saying how, there's two sides to every story, Shawn, and, your father loves you. And I was like thinking, I finally said, I said, Dad, I don't even know who this lady is.
Mm.
Like, this isn't the time for her, to tell me what I should be feeling. I was like, if you want to talk. And then the one thing that killed me was, and I was there maybe 5 minutes because he sat down and like first thing he wanted to do, he's like, hey, you want to have a beer? And I'm thinking from all the, all I remembered him was you get drunk and you beat my mom. And, that like man thing of like, let's have a beer together. It's like, yeah, there's that side of it. But the other side was you sent all these emails and you told the court, that you weren't an alcoholic and all these lies. And, maybe, I'm not going down that road, but I'm like, that's the first thing you want to do with me is sit down and have a beer after your, new girlfriend or wife or whoever she was is just ragging on my mom, who my mom raised single mom, since we were basically 9, 10, and my whole life. And it was like, so I just left. But it's, and that's the thing where it comes back to like the strong dad community is all those aspects and like, to reach out to him and like, he is still your dad. And or he's still my dad. I mean, and I think that it's really important as a father, like I always say to myself, like, well, when my kids are mature enough and able to understand, why I don't bring them around my dad and, don't do these things, those are like the hard talks that I want to have with them. But I feel like if I can be that, the father that he wasn't, where, I can build that relationship with them, teach them some of these, hard lessons that I learned the hard way, then, when it comes time, they may not understand. So I don't even really bring it up. But, there'll be a time when I feel like my son before my daughter, but hey, why do I never see grandpa, from your side? And then that's when I think I could use it as a, um, kind of a molding experience to show, hey, this is why, a man protects his family. And I'm in my mind, how I was, and I have my own, emotional struggles, but the best thing to do was to keep him away from you in the aspect of, I don't know what he's going to say about your grandma. I don't know what he's going to say, and all these stories. Yeah, of course there's two sides, but the point is at this point in my life, like I think for my own mental health and my family's mental health, it's best to, try, but then his emails or his responses just tell me that's the same thing. I'd be going down the same rabbit hole of I never did anything wrong, all these other things.
Yeah.
So
And then children, as we go through a similar battle in our family with my biological father, and like I just don't have a relationship with him, and he's never met any of our children. And there was one thing that my fiance always says is that children need that consistency as well. So if you was in the future to introduce then your son to his grandpa, and then what if your dad then doesn't want to know and it's 12 months before he sees him again, and that's just no good for the child then either. From my position, I can understand why you reach out and you want that bit of a closure, because like you said, it's your dad. But then equally, I completely agree and understand why you're tactical with it and you keep that distance from impacting your children as well.
yeah, and I think it's, and I think it falls back to, that's why like when I first, found you in the strong dad community, I'm so vested in it, more than just what I post on the page or what you and I talk about. I think it's a whole lifestyle, and it's, it's way more than just, what you see on the page or going to the gym or, like, we mentioned hunting, which is like, that became a huge part of my, emotional stability and, mental health and even bonding with my brothers. Because like, as like, each of my brothers are different. My younger brother, we joke, we call him Webster growing up, because like he was like in the books. Like, he is like one of the smartest people that I like have ever talked to. He talks deeply, he talks sincerely, and we all do. But with him, I mean, we're all strong. We believe in fitness, but like, his thing was like, he took the woods, and he was like, I'm gonna get. And I think it, kind of added to, like, with me, it was like I just felt like a weak little child, and I wanted to run in there and, like, beat the crap out of my dad and save my mom. I think my older brother was the same way. I think all of us were, but I think like I think with my younger brother, his response was like, we had a woods behind our house. And so like when we would be feeling, certain ways or whatever through, through school or things that, not having a dad growing up, I remember I always joke with some of my friends about, how to teach work ethic. Well, we had the lawn service, but then we got into paintball. So we made this big paintball field behind the house. And I remember it started with, we just dug a hole. And I think it was like, my little brother's name's Colin, and we were just like, we would get off school and we'd like have all these feelings, and like, we didn't really talk about them to each other a lot, but like just seeing him and like, it was like we knew they were there, and we would just dig, like we'd dig this hole until like we got tired. And it turned out to be like, I mean, it was over like 6 feet deep, and like you could literally like go in there and like hide and nobody would ever see you. And then that turned into, that was like our main bunker when we would play paintball with some of our friends. And I mean, looking back on like a lot of things in life, like, the working out, like the marathon training that I want to, get into also a little bit later with you, and, some of the StrongDads, but the woods, hunting, and like this whole, it kind of all circles, how to, like, feelings that we've had. And, then with, like, just explore, that led to, well, let's go deeper in the woods. And then, and then it's like, whenever I'm in the woods, and I feel like both my brothers are this, like, you have this sense of clarity. And, just like one saying, like, if you wake up in the woods, so like to hunt, to be successful in harvesting, any animal, yeah, you're killing it, but, you're going out, like, I hunt public land a lot, which is, like, literally just Saturday. It was opening day gun season, and my older brother, he has not harvested a deer yet on public land. I was talking about this property. I've hunted it for over 10 years. It's over 800 acres. And his best friend, his neighbor, was like, Shawn, I really want to hunt, but all my friends are out of shape, and they could not go. So I showed him a map, and I'm like, okay, this is where I go. I was like, I guarantee you'll see a deer out here. But, if you get an opportunity, that's another topic. And so this led into, the challenge of the hard terrain, navigating the woods, getting where other hunters aren't. Because a lot of the hunters that I've experienced, especially on these big properties, human nature, you want to take the shortcut, or you want to go, and that leads into like, something I was talking about before, even on the, like in the little group chat, was, there's a way that you can look at it as, you're just taking a high powered rifle into the woods and just smoking an animal. And some hunters, that is, that's the thrill that they like, that's like an ego driven thing. But when you really get down to the, the nitty gritty of it, first of all, the venison, elk, deer, antelope, um, mule deer, like the amino acid profile of that meat, it's one of the highest, leanest, best proteins you can get. And like in America, there's some at the grocery stores, but I mean, it is way, way overpriced. You don't know where it's sourced from. Some of them they do, which I'm totally against. They do these high fence properties where they'll put, like 10, 12-foot fences, and they take deer from the wild, and then they start to, kind of try to breed them and just, grow a herd. And a lot of them, they feed them with corn, or they feed them with grain, which isn't their, it isn't their natural diet. They'll, yeah, if there's a farm field, they'll go out and graze, but a lot of times they're browsing on, greenery and shrubs and, different wildlife that's in the woods.
Yeah,
So you're,
berries and stuff, isn't it? And
yeah, berries. I mean, if they find, like, what there's like preferred foods, but if they, they love like apples and, pumpkins, stuff like that, but a lot of that stuff's not, directly in the woods. So these people do these high fence farms, and then they literally put a feeder out, and they sit in a blind and they shoot them at the feeder. And I mean, that's literally, and that's like, shooting fish in a barrel.
yeah,
And, to me, that is, and these guys, they'll harvest some monster bucks, and they'll, use trophies. And that is where, like, some of the, people that are, more against hunting, to me, that's the bad of it. Some of these ranches that do that, they will, they put their, they track these deer, and then they'll have a book where, like, you'll go through the book, and it'll be like, here's a 12-point non-typical buck, and I mean, he's got some massive drop tines, and just huge spread, and then they put a price on it, basically. And it's like, that's where, yeah, you still have to go out in the woods, but you have a guide that knows where that deer's been, bedding. He knows where he's going to be. Whereas to me, the challenge is to either, like, from my brother's side, he just recently bought some property, and so what we've been doing, through hard work, is it's about 30 acres, has a bunch of dead ash trees on it. So we've been clearing the dead ash trees out, and then kind of through conservation, reestablishing the property. Planting in persimmon trees, because it's like a very good late season, food for the deer. Putting in food plots, cutting trails. And so when we hunt his property, which I physically haven't hunted yet, he's actually out there today. You get that sense of pride because, if you do see a big buck come through, or an animal, or even a mature doe, you put the work into the property, where you can establish, a deer that comes, but you may never see him. I mean, he's been out there almost every day for the past, 2 weeks, and he hasn't shot a big buck yet.
mm,
He harvested a doe, which, which I was lucky enough to do end of October. And so I'm like kind of jumping around between these ideas, but, like, he's got private land where you can manage the land, you can put the work in. The more work you put in, the more likely you are for success. But what I personally love, and this past weekend, Saturday was the best for me, is taking a brand new hunter out, and then taking my older brother to a, 800-acre property where you physically have to put in the work to get away from other hunters to have the opportunity to, even see a deer. And what I loved about that was he's my brother's neighbor. I mean, he's my friend, but he's like really good friends with my brother. He always wanted to go hunting, but like what he said to me was, he's like, Shawn, he's like, all my friends are fat, out of shape, and they wouldn't put the work in to even get out here to be like to where you showed me. I felt bad about it because I wanted to really guide him more, and especially with my brother, but I had a spot that I wanted to hunt because it's been like my Moby Dick in that area for the past 3 years. There's been like this cat and mouse game with this really mature buck that I've seen, but I've never had an opportunity, because like some hunters will just take any shot that they can take. My thing, out of respect for the animal, is there's only certain like kill shots that one shot, one kill. It's a clean harvest. The animal doesn't suffer. The animal doesn't run off, and you have to track it forever and push it through the woods. And so that's my thing. So if there's only a couple shots. So that's why, like, this buck that I've been trying to find, I'll see him, but I don't have a shot. And like, I
mm,
think that's where some of the, people that don't understand hunting, and, look at it just as like, respect to the animal. I mean, I've sat countless times and never got a deer. And the other thing too is, like, to go back to the hunt that I did, harvest, and I was so excited about, in the DNR, which is Department of Natural Resources. They control all the hunting in America, and they put you have to buy a license, you have to take like a hunter ed class, and then they do certain properties a year where they do a draw. So it's literally pick a number from a hat. And if they draw you, then there's a slot that you can get to hunt these properties.
As in
And so
like a
like,
date and time slot.
yeah, and it's, they'll give you like 3 days to hunt it.
Right.
And to me, that has been, I started doing this maybe 5 years ago, and it's been the best challenge and enjoyable hunting experience like I've ever done, because it goes back to me, it goes back to like everything that the Strong Dad community is about. The fitness community is, you have these properties that are, I mean, the one that I hunted, that I harvested that doe on, that I posted in the Strong Dad community, it was the total property, I think it was like close to 900 acres, but it was a prairie, and it was all like CRP grass. There was only one line of trees in the back. And so the challenge of that is they only put you in one parking spot. So you can't drive around the property. You can't, everything is literally all your gear and you have to, physically walk the terrain, hike the terrain. And the other thing is like, you have to, it's a prairie, so the grass is maybe waist high at that. And so like you're exposed the whole time. And I mean, there's no way that you can, and it's a bow. So like the closest, range, some of the like, pro archers, they can reach out, 60 yards or so. Me, I'm only comfortable within 30. I mean, I
And
need to
that's
work on it
important.
more.
Yeah, because we haven't mentioned that yet. You hunt with a bow, don't you? Not a rifle.
Correct. So, and the thing with the bow is and that limits your opportunity, because like to harvest a deer with a bow, first you got to get them in closer, but then there's only, you know, two shots. It has to be quartering away, which means like he's walked past you, and like his body, like his butt is, kind of facing you. And then there's like two kill shots. And, if you look at bow hunters, a lot of times the shot is the most important part. But what you can't, and the action of actually physically drawing the bow, when that deer's that close, if he's right up on you and you draw, you're going to spook him. So the challenge of that is, when you see him coming in, you have to predict where you're going to take your shot and hold that bow drawn until he gets to that spot and then release. And so my compound bow that I shoot, it's a 70-pound draw. So, I mean, if you think, you have to hold that 70-pound draw. Now there's a release on it once you get about, halfway through the draw, but you're still under tension that whole time. So that's where the challenges become of, you know, physically you have to be able to draw the bow, and you have to hold the bow, control your breathing, keep everything on point until you get that shot. And a lot of times you don't get that shot. And, the biggest thing for me with, that hunt was, it was a huge property. I had to carry all my gear in, it's probably a mile and a half in the woods, set up, have an opportunity to get the shot, make the shot. And then you still have to, the deer that I killed, it was about 120 pounds on the hoof. So after it was dressed, I think when I put it on, took it to the butcher, it weighed like 108 pounds, I think. So now you have, all your gear, been out in the woods all day. Now you have this deer that you harvested, and you have to, navigate. And it was dark at that point. So now you have to navigate, a mile and a half back to your truck, dragging this deer, carrying this deer over all this terrain. And so like what I want to like, and I mean, this kind of like was a long story, but what I really want to emphasize about it is the fact that, you know, you're providing for your family in the aspect of, it's a clean, non, um, zero preservatives, zero additives. I mean, it's as natural as God intended it to be of a meat source for you. But then it's also just the idea of, back to like this Saturday. So my brother's friend was able to get a deer, and it took us probably 2.5 hours just to drag this deer out of the woods. And he said to me, he made the joke, and back to like, I'm saying, he's like, my friends are all fat and out of shape. He's like, you're a marathon runner. And he's like, I don't think I could do this with anybody else. And
Mm.
so, and I think we were, because he's thanked me probably 4 different times. And, I tell him, like, it's not about me, brother, but it's like, you got the opportunity, you did this all, and he helped us drag it, but we were rotating. he's like, man, I'll get it out, but without you and, my brother, he was like, I'd probably be out here till midnight, 1 in the morning. And, that to me, it's the aspect of providing for your family, clean meat, but just to be able to be physically fit enough, like the old, like hunter gatherers, or, the,
Yeah.
tribal people, where like, if you didn't go out and, there isn't a grocery store, and that's the other thing is like, commercial meat packaging, you don't know the farmer that raised it. You don't know what he was fed. You don't know, I mean, you don't even know the process of, bringing him to your table. And, and it all goes into like, the fact that you can go out and hunt. And I mean, that's one thing I love about, the I don't know what it's like in the UK, but I mean, in America, we have that opportunity. It's pretty much you buy a license and you can just go to these properties. But, and then it's like, like you mentioned earlier, like the fact of if all hell breaks loose and they say, the doomsday preppers, but, with martial law, or, if to fend for yourself, I want a freezer full of deer, and
Yeah.
some other things, compared to, then I could at least trade with somebody, for something else that I may not have. But,
Yeah. And
that leads.
it is important because the chances of needing to do that are very slim. But if it was to happen, you and your family are screwed without the abilities to do it. And yeah, it's not a thing in the UK, hunting. But I know that if I was an animal, how would I want to go? Would I want to be forced into an abattoir where I can hear all my friends and family being slaughtered and there's panic and I'm frightened? Or would I rather just be in a forest, living my day to day, enjoying life, eating my berries, and then it's over? Drain. So even what you do, by far, that's the more humane way of doing it. But yet you'll have people who are not vegans who will eat meat but won't do the dirty work, telling you that it's wrong. And it's because over here in the UK, it's not a thing. You can do hunting for deer and stuff, but that's like in the Highlands of Scotland.
Okay.
Generally, in most of the UK, it's not really a thing, but it's definitely something that I'd like to do at one point in my lifetime. I think it's important, not just having that skill set, but having the appreciation as well. But one thing I'd like to do is, you mentioned, again, we're going to go back now to when you saw the paramedics working on your dad after he attempted suicide, and how that sort of inspired or led you in the direction to what you're doing with work now. Was that the reason that you went down the firefighter route, or was it part of the reason?
I mean, I think like it sounds like it, like the good story, like, I was inspired because they were able to save my dad and I got into it. But, I was lost. I mean, I remember it was my two brothers and my mom were sitting in our kitchen, and I think I was a junior in high school. And the idea was like, she was basically like saying, hey, you guys got to do something, like you got to get a job, you got to go to college, or, and we were so like, I think it goes back to like, without having the dad growing up of that like male figure, we were just mixed up, and my mom is like, she's super caring, super emotional, like, she's like a, picture perfect mom. She gave us all the support that we needed, but it wasn't that man, like even a thing of like, where I look at it like with my son, like if, if he falls or something, like my wife will nurture him and hug him and kiss him. And, I'll be like, hey, come on, man, it's a stinger. You're good. Let's go. And just to have that like toughness where it's like, yeah, he loves me and he cares about me, but, this isn't an emergency where we're going to be screaming and crying. And so basically that conversation led to, she was like, I had this like sense of brotherhood and a sense of family that I wanted. I wanted it so bad. Like I craved for it. And, there were some movies that came out, like there's Backdraft that was in the 90s. It's like, I mean, firefighter traditional, like, I mean, just amazing movie. And then there was like Ladder 49 that came out shortly after. And, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at like the cliche of, these are your brothers and, this is your family. And, if we go down in a fire, like, the one saying from Backdraft, as like cliche as it is, but it's like, if you go, I go. And that like inspired me. It was like, well, although I got my brothers, my mom, I never had this big, tight family because of, some of the things that I've talked about. I didn't have that dad, and, they just looked like such a badass job to get into. And I was like, I'm going to get on the job, and, they're going to be my brothers, and they're going to be my family, and I'm going to have some mentors, and this is what it is. So then, surprisingly enough, one of my friends that I met shortly after, became really close with senior year, his dad was a firefighter. So he took me to the station. I thought the ladder truck was the coolest thing in the world. And I mean, I remember climbing on the ladder, looking at it. And that's when I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And, back to, like the idea of like, okay, I'm going to be as strong as I can be. I'm going to be the best I can be, like the doing push-ups as a, emotional detachment of just do them until you can't push anymore. That's kind of the same attitude that I took to firefighting. And, to basically make a long story short, it's led me to this conquest of leadership. And there's been, I've been involved in some rescues, some amazing saves on the job, but the common denominator that I've found was poor leadership.
Okay.
And because, like by me having this drive and this like, this tough man attitude towards firefighting, like I was like, and this sounds like, I don't want to like sound like stealing valor or anything from anybody, but I was trying to be like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm a Navy SEAL of firefighting. Like this is
Yeah.
special
You want to
forces.
you want to be the absolute best.
Yeah. And so that's where, and both my brothers, like we've led to this, my older brother's a police officer, younger brother's in business, but like within, and I don't know if it's a coping mechanism underlying. I've never really talked to a therapist about it. I just look at it like my standard of the job is that aspect of like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be special forces. I'm the man, like we're getting in there, and I'm the guy that, if shit breaks loose, you're going to call me, and like together we're going to get this done. And it's been a huge struggle for me throughout my career with, egotistical leaders. I think some of these officers that I have, they just look at it as a job, or they look at it as, the more rank you get, the more you can delegate other people to do things. My thing, the big thing, like, we talked about Jocko, that's been a huge, resemblance to me is the extreme ownership policy of, theory of you're the problem and the solution to your problems. So if you don't take ownership in it and say, hey, I'm failing here, this is me that's the problem, nothing's going to happen. And I think that I've taken that uh, attitude towards the job, and I've made some enemies because of the, it's like, you're the captain. Why don't you do servant style leadership? Or why aren't you, when, we could potentially be in a situation to make a rescue, let's train on this, like if we're not good at this, let's work harder at it. And by doing that attitude, like I've had some amazing things. Like, I mean, we made a second floor rescue that it's called Vent Under Search, which is like basically you break out the window, you ladder the window, you jump in. It's if there's, fire between the victim and you. So you can't go in the traditional way. I think it was 2 years ago in January, or this January, it'd be 2 years. Uh, we pulled up, we had the dispatch notes, and it was, there's somebody on the second floor. Said to my captain, I was like, I made a suggestion, and that's my one problem that I try to really work with, like by this aggressiveness and this, like I'm gonna take every class I can take and get all this knowledge. I tend to, like the one therapist said, like your presence is known in a room, and I was like, well,
Okay.
what's that mean? And she was like, you're fit, you're strong, you're like not afraid to express yourself, and you're passionate. But a lot of people, I think, take that as, like I'm pushing my weight around, or I'm, aggressive and trying to fight. And so this is kind of what happened in this rescue is we pulled up and I heard the notes. I think my officer was actually on the wrong channel at the time, so he didn't hear what I was hearing. Whenever we get a fire, we switch to an operations channel, which is basically so he was on the main channel and I was on ops, and I heard the, crew that was already there said something, to the aspect of, the husband was there, he made it out, but he said, my wife is in that room. She was like 300 something pounds, bedridden. And the only way to get to it was through the window. So I said, my captain, I'm like, Cap, this sounds like a vendor search. It sounds like a vendor search. I don't know if he didn't have the training to know what a vendor search was. I don't want to say that about him because, I mean, he's a solid guy. I think he just, maybe it was like he was a newly promoted officer too. So I don't know if it was like, all the commotion of, man, I'm in charge. Like, he had like, that he like pivoted for a minute. And since I was so eager, like, this is what we got to do. Let's do it. Let's do it. My engineer picked up. So we ended up laddering the building. I broke the window out. I ended up crawling through, found her on the bed, made a makeshift harness out of some webbing, like basically some rope that we had, was able to get her to the windowsill. And I remember I was so out of breath, and I was on almost on bells, which means like you're running out of air in your, your your breathing apparatus. And I'm looking, and my captain's in the window, and he's like fumbling. And I mean, given the situation, like, like I said, I'm not trying to say he was doing something wrong or anything, but I was like, we got to get her out of here. And when she fell off the bed, she was just laying on my knees and like my thighs. And I'm like, I remember thinking, like, if I drop her to the ground, we are not getting her up.
Mm.
And she was unconscious, but she was breathing. I remember when I first, like, I shone my light on her, and I saw her like chest rising and falling. And so I'm like, we got to get her out of here. Well, at this time, there was another officer who's, a more senior officer. He climbed up the ladder, and he was at the window. So I remember I look at the window, smoke's like blowing out the window. I see the little bit of light, and I'm like, thank God. I'm like, I'm just going to push her to him. They're going to get her out, and we're good. Well, he was a smaller guy. And I remember him stopping. He's like, Shawn, no, don't stop. And he wanted me to switch and get on the ladder. So I ended up, I handed off. And this time I grabbed my captain's hand, and I put the, like the harness that I made out of the rope in his hand. He held her, pulled it in. I'm like, you got her? He was like, yeah. And then we were able to switch positions, get on the ladder. They kind of like flopped her out the window to me. And I don't know how I did it, but was able to bring her down the ladder without dropping her. We got her to the ground. She's still unconscious. The medics were right there, handed her off. And thinking about this, looking back on it, I talked to my therapist about this. It really kind of hurt me because of the aspect of, like she calls it, an administrative abandonment, like where I feel like, these leaders, and I think it goes back to like my not having a dad growing up, where, and some of that trauma, like there's the correlations that we've made is like, I look for this like male figure to be like, oh, Shawn, you did a great job. We did a great job. And when I don't get it, I get like this, and it's like back to the push-ups. Well, now I got to work harder. Now you got to get on it, and, the thing that was crazy to me is, so I get out, and I was doing some research. It was like, after you get an adrenaline drop, like your body like starts to like not shut down, but like you're like in a state of recovery. And so I'm sitting on this abandoned car while they're still fighting the fire. And like I couldn't catch my breath. Like I was tingling in my hands. Like I felt all these weird feelings. And I'm looking around, and like, it's almost like looking like, who's coming to help me, and then I realized like nobody, and I think I could have asked for help, but it's that like ego and that stubbornness too. And then the one officer's like, he's like, Hendron, get over here. So I get up and right back inside, fighting fire. And I remember it was my officer and me, we were in the stairwell. And it was all, charred. There was still fire burning above us, but for the most of the part, we had it under control. And this was like, strange as it sounds, like it was like the light at the end of the tunnel. The one battalion chief, who, amazing guy. He like, I don't know where he came from, but he's like, I see him in the hallway, and I'm still struggling, I'm tired. I'm like still out of breath, trying to work and, fight through this. And he goes, engine 4. He's like, get out of here. And, that was the engine I was on. And he's like, go outside. So he comes, sits there, sits us down, gives us water. He's like, you guys made that rescue. He's like, you're in here. He's like, they got this. He's like, you need to, and that was like, I guess that reinforcement of like, to me, like, the father figure that I'm always looking for, or that I'm trying to be, that came out and was like, wait, you just got your ass kicked. You're still in here getting your ass kicked. Take a break. I care
Yeah.
about you. And, I'm going to give you some recovery. And then that kind of leads to, like, the change of the job where, now they've, they've transferred me. They put me in a float pool. I was bouncing around. I finally got a station. It's a lot slower station, but the officer there is amazing. I mean, we get along. We have the same like servant style leadership attitude. He tells me all the time. He's like, it's I used to teach at the fire academy, and so he's like, you taught at the university, you taught fire science. He's like, you know some of this stuff. He said, if you know something that I don't know, if you want to put a class on, he said, I'll set it up. And so I think like, everything happens for a reason. And I think it was the way like to mold me to be like, yeah, you can be this like, strong, thick-headed, like, you know, badass fireman that you work so hard to be. But without the right leader to kind of reel you back in, you're only going to sink your ship.
Yeah, so that's so important. And like you said, when that battalion commander or whoever it was, like you said engine 4, get out of here, that's almost what you needed, is that acknowledgement that you'd already done a good job. Now take a breather and look after yourself. So, well, I'm glad you're in a good place now with a good leader. But how does, and again, there's a lot of like a strong mentality and a strong personality here, and you certainly do have a very strong, commanding but infectious presence about you. But how does that transfer then to the home life, where you need to be more emotional?
Oh, completely. And, I'm glad that you brought that up, and, good way to transition it, because to be honest, like, I think out of everything that we talk about, and like we talk about like the Misogi and like, you know, the physical aspect of it is, like for me, it's been okay. I want to finish a marathon at, 4 hours and 30 minutes or less. And just everything like that struggle, anything physical, I feel like just from my coping mechanisms and like how I am, like I can put my hands on it and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. If it's like bench press 400 pounds, or if it's, run this or do this. But like to bring all that home, that has been the biggest struggle of myself. And, my wife she's amazing. She's super supportive, but like I remember when we were in the WhatsApp, like I shot something out about, emotional, being emotional. And I think that from the years of, the childhood trauma, and then the fact of, some of the gunshots and the traumas and the shootings and these messed up calls that I've been on, in my career as a fireman, there's one thing I talked about in therapy was the fact that like you want to be a strong man. You want to protect your family from those things. And the hardest part is that, that I transition. Still learning. I'm still getting better. But my biggest challenge, like at home life, is, to be able, I call it a light switch. So to be it like when I'm at the firehouse, it's like that bell drops. If it's a, structure fire or a rescue or, any of these, scenarios, it's like, boom, you go, you rock and roll. Here's the problem. There's a fire, put it out. There's somebody in there, go save them. You can do those, manly, aggressive things that we train for. And over the years, like that has worked 100%. Like, if it's, I mean, countless situations. I work in a very urban, kind of, rough neighborhood. And so it's like, if someone's screaming, like, you can, control the situation to a point where how you talk to people, how you address it, you calm it down, and it's like, bam. But on the home front, like, and especially with my wife, and I mean, I apologize to her a lot. And it's my biggest weakness is the fact that trying to build that emotional, like to turn it on, you know,
Yeah.
and, there was an old firefighter actually met him at the gym, and he was talking, and, I told him about how long I spent on the ambulance and, like the community I worked in. And he's like, man, Shawn, he's like, you just got to be numb. And like that, I never forget that, because some of the therapy that I talk with, and, therapists, it's like that emotional numbness where you just build up these walls, and it's like you almost have to, in the firehouse, or in the more on these emergency scenes. And where it's like, dude, you're not going to break me, and I'm going to be tough, and I'm going to do what I have to do to keep myself safe and get home to my family, but also to do the job. And then when you transfer that into, your home life, it's like, if one of the things that my wife's best friend's husband was diagnosed with cancer, and like my thing was, that's terrible, and I was like, I'm so sorry, but I'm like jumping to solutions. Like, okay, what did the doctor say? What did this? What would be, and I think that's like the first responder, or, like military police aspect is like, okay, that sucks, but let's,
What are we going to do?
what are we going to do? And the challenge of like that light switch has been, I think that, but then to shut it off and be like, she doesn't need me to say, okay, babe, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and then get here and then go from there. She needs me to just like hug her, give her a kiss, say, hey, I feel it's terrible. It's, I'm here for you. And, that was something like when I reached out in the Strong Dad, chat, like about emotional, like that's my biggest struggle, is like to be like, my one neighbor said, we're talking about, he's like, just be nice. And I was like, you know, if it's that simple, why is it
Yeah.
so hard? But it's like, uh, the one, I can't forget the term, but I talk about it in therapy all the time. Oh, hypervigilance
Okay.
is like the hypervigilance of, you're constantly on alert, and they say a lot of military people, a lot of firefighters, a lot of police officers, that work in this, kind of, you could go from sitting and, drinking coffee to bam at a life or death situation. So like you're constantly on this hypervigilance. And I wasn't aware of it until like she gave me the term, and I looked it up and I did some research, and I'm like, that's it. Because that hypervigilance is like, okay, he's got cancer. Boom, let's go here, 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 and do this and fix this and
Yeah.
call the
Yeah.
doctors. When to be at home and be like, emotionally sound and secure, and that strong, provider of, emotional strength. I feel, my wife doesn't need that. She just needs me to sit there and say, either give her a hug, or,
Yeah.
listen to her feelings. And that's been the hardest thing. And I mean, if she were here, she'd tell you the same thing. Like, we love him, but we need to reel him back to this, like, emotional, position where you can provide that support. And I
Yeah.
think, that's just like back to, like the Strong Dad community. I've been blessed with all of these, some of these rescues I've been a part of, I mean, I could talk and tell all kinds of stories, but like, the thing of like the strength that you need to do those things, go out in a 800-acre woods and harvest a deer and get back, take a friend out and just hike and show him where, the woods, and, you need all those strengths from, fitness and these, skills, even to be able to, keep up with your kids. That's the biggest thing, like, to pick them up, or, run with them and, do things. But without that emotional strength, and I think that's the biggest challenge for me, and I think a lot of, these tough guy figures, is to reel it back in and be like, hey, I need to be here emotionally for my family, but also more importantly, my wife and, my daughter. I feel like my son's is going to be just as tough as I am, because that's just like that thick-headed, idea. But without that, emotional love, and, it's like you're lost.
I've never thought of it in that way, or I've never, I guess, had it highlighted, but you've just said it about providing emotional support. And when we look at what it means to be a man, to be a provider, protector, and a leader, we often think at the provider element as providing income, providing security, providing a roof over the head, providing food, but also exactly what you've just highlighted there, providing emotional support. It's so important, isn't it? Because again, like you said, similarly to your children, if your son was to fall over, it's not get up, you pussy, come on. But it's not running over and making him cry by making it a big deal. But
Right.
it's almost, you've got this. It's nothing major. Let's keep going. And it's finding that middle ground between being tough, being a leader, keep moving forward, being resilient, being strong, but also being emotional and empathetic and considerate. It's a difficult balance to strike, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and like, one of he's actually he's a pastor and he's a fireman we work with. And I mean, he said it, this is like maybe a month ago we were talking about it. And we're talking about marriage, we're talking about, spiritual health as well as emotional health, and just led to all these, awesome conversations that we had. And the one thing he said that stuck to me is he said to me, he's like, Shawn, if there was a manual for, being a dad, being a husband, doing these things. He's like, you, me, sure all the strong dad community and, countless other dads out there would say, man, give me a copy of that manual. I'm going to read it. I'm going to highlight it. There's going to be notes all over it, because it's like, bam, I got that. Just like, like the Jocko Extreme Ownership book. Like, I mean, I got highlight stuff in there, little tabs, everything. But if you know, there isn't. And so that's why I think we need these communities like what you're developing. And, I'm so blessed and happy to be a part of it because I think it's so important to show, you know, it's sometimes I feel like a hypocrite when it comes to, even like with this community, because I was thinking about, things like being on the podcast and looking at my own failures, like in my marriage and like some of this emotional issues that, I keep building up between, being shutting out from work and not bringing, some of this trauma and these, bad situations home, but also, trying to be there and be that, soft, emotional person that my wife needs at times. And I think, honestly, I personally think that is the biggest challenge of a man is to, be tough and do all the things that, we do, but be able to come home and, show that emotionality and that, intimacy to your wife who that's all they want. They know you're tough, but it's like you need to, and that's my biggest failure that I think I'm still challenge myself with is being able to follow that manual that's, unwritten manual of, hey, when she says this, you think you want to do this, but she really just needs you to just, you know, give her a hug or,
Yeah,
say the right words. I think every man challenges with saying the right words with a woman, but also it just comes down to that, that balance of like, there's not a lot. I'm back to like the fire service and like, my brother being a police officer, these old, like in America, these old Vietnam, you know, war era leaders that, suck it up and, men don't cry and men just get out there, walk it off and keep going. That's the one change that I've seen recently within the fire service is this, and even fitness and whole is this emotional stability of, your emotional support is important. Men can cry, men can feel these things, but to learn how to be tough but deal with them as well and
exactly.
stay on that
And
path.
yeah, and like you said, is understanding those boundaries because yes, men can be emotional, 100% for that. I get emotional myself. But then, like you said, it's just knowing when, but being able to turn that off because you get a call and you need to go and save 3 children from a third story and you know those children from a friend or the community. If you're just emotional, you're not going to do a very good job. Whereas when you can switch that and turn into your firefighter mode and just be purely logical, that's when it all sort of, that's the balance we need to strike. I remember Andrew Tate, and I don't listen to much of what he says, but I heard something before. Have you heard of Andrew Tate?
But yeah,
Yeah,
I've watched it.
I heard him say something before, and I couldn't disagree with it. He was having a debate with someone, and they were saying about like masculinity is a very bad thing. And he basically said, and again, maybe different words, but he basically said, if you was in a building and terrorists turned up and held you all at gunpoint, you're going to want masculine men to turn up to sort the situation. Same with a firefighter. If I'm stuck in a burning building with my children, I want masculine men turning up to smash that window to get us all down. Striking that balance is difficult, and I think it'll always be difficult.
Yeah, and I think, and like, I mean, I've watched, a lot of these, I guess you say new upcoming influencers, like, and
Yeah.
take Andrew Tate as an example. And, you know, I guess, and not to disrespect them, but I think that when you put yourself in the grand, like, spotlight, of, this successful man that, has got all this money and this wealth. And now you have a platform to speak on. And the thing that I think you really, to be humble is very difficult, I think, at times when you have all this, wealth or this, physical strength or these other things. And I think when it comes to actually being a good man, a good person, you need to be humble. Like, when you look at like Andrew Tate, I've heard some of his things, and it's like, talking about women and dating and, like, I'm this alpha male, and I'm so strong and I'm so better than all these other males that now I'm going to influence these males. But he doesn't, like, some of these guys don't reel themselves back in and say things like, hey, emotional strength is important, you know, even it's another huge aspect, like, of, why I look at my firefighting career, I look at my fitness career, and even like the Strong Dads community of, you know, there's that voice in your head that wants to be complacent. They want to do the less is more. Like, you don't want to, if you're waking up at 5 in the morning and you need to go for a run, and you look outside and it's, 30 degrees, and you're like, I know once I hit whatever my mark is, like for me, it's like, mile and a half, 2 miles. I'm in that zone where I'm like, I'm warm, I'm
Hell yeah.
flowing, I'm moving, like we're getting it, now I got it. But that first, mile, my body's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, stop. This sucks,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that, some of these well-known influencers, you know, a lot of them are taking, they're highly supplemented. They're taking performance drugs. They have these bodies and these physiques that, they're putting a false image out
They're
to the average.
unattainable.
And I think in the end, the concept that I think all of them could say is, hey, I I am not I am not realistic,
Yes.
because I've gained my wealth from other things. And from getting my wealth, I've worked hard, no doubt I've worked hard. And I don't want to take anything away from those people, because even people that use steroids still have to put the work in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
gym. But I think when you sit up there and you're like, I'm jacked, I'm shredded, I got 4% body fat, I have all this wealth from things I've gotten into. The underlying cause that they need to focus on, like, if you look at somebody, you can tell, okay, this dude's fit or this dude's strong, but I think the underlying thing to say is that you have to do the hard thing. And the hard thing is, it doesn't take any money, it doesn't take any, outside motivation other than from inside you. And that hard thing is, like, for me, when I know I have to do, a long run, or I know that, the one call that the hardest thing I ever did in my life was we had a call on the highway where a car got hit by a semi. His 6-year-old child got ejected, and the top of his head was laying next to him, and the father was in the car, had, bleeding, like, pouring out of his face. He was not in the right mindset because of that, but also because of the fact that he was just in a traumatic accident, probably had a concussion, a lot of other things going on. And I bring this up not to, like, for the gore, but we had to physically pull that father off of his dead child to treat him, and, and get him in the ambulance. And I mean, looking back, like, it's very tough, and my eyes are getting watery, I'm getting emotional about it. But it isn't about, his horrible day was, one of my horrible days, in the aspect that to treat him and, save him, I had to pull him away from his son.
Yeah,
And I look at I think any dad would, you ain't touching me, man. I'm staying with my kid.
exactly.
But then I think that was, and I've talked about it in therapy and things, and that's back to, like, that was the hard thing, but it needed to be done. And I think
And
that,
yeah, you carry
you
on.
know, and I was just going to say, like, like, I mean, that's a horrible situation. And I don't mean to, like, like, use that shock and awe theory, like, some people use with it. But to me, it was, just, that is the one moment of my life that, like, I look at it like I knew what had to be done, and we had to do it, me and my ambulance partner, and the guy ended up living. And it was just like to look back and say, to take that same example, but put it to, fitness or, running or where the hard thing that needs to be get done isn't always what you might want to do.
Going back to that example, you knew what needed to be done. If you was completely emotional in that situation, you probably would have cried with the dad and you wouldn't have been able to do your job and do the hard thing to get the guy treated. So again, it just shows that example of where you need to be able to switch off those emotions at the right time as well. But one thing I would say is, yeah, you've got things you've admitted you want to work on with how emotional you are, how supportive you are with your emotions, but it's a massive thing that you've been able to admit that. And it's one thing I always say to guys, especially in the communities, that we don't seek perfection. No one's going to be the perfect dad and the perfect man, but as long as we know where we can improve and we're looking for that little bit of progress every single day, we know what our flaws are and we're looking to get better at them, then that, in a sense, that is perfection because we're always improving. But one thing I want to highlight, or one thing I want to come to, if that's okay with you, is your fitness. What does that look like for you? What philosophies have you got? How do you train? How do you manage your nutrition? All that stuff.
So, and it's been a huge journey for me as well. I talked about the emotional health. I talked about, one of my coping mechanisms was let's just do some push-ups. Well, I remember that led to, like when I was in high school, it was like when I first like seriously started working out. And the thing that I think without like having that father figure, trying to get into sports, trying to do things like I had some confidence issues. And it was, that's where like fitness came into me because I just remember like this, it worked for me then, but I was like, I didn't have a lot of friends, had all these like, emotional questions and, stuff going. And I used to look at like girls that I liked and, this sounds like really, I guess, really funny, but I mean, to me, it sounds funny, but it's like, I just didn't have the confidence to like go talk to them because of, and so I would like sit in the gym and I would like just lift weights. And I'm like, man, if I can get stronger and maybe she'll come talk to me or maybe like, this idea of like, and it's totally like opposite of like, the man like to approach a girl and ask her on a date, things like that. But that was like my high school career because, we were going through all these things. I remember like, I really loved football. My older brother played, but then the one time my dad showed up literally on the football field, like walked out in the middle of the football field. It luckily was during a practice and not a game. I mean, that would have been, I don't know if I'd ever recovered from that, high school wise. But ever since that, I feel like the coaches were like, hey, we know there's some stuff going on, but, so they kind of, we all just decided to stop sports. And then I got into wrestling. And so that kind of started my, fitness journey was, the idea that if I win or if I lose, it's on me. With me being kind of secluded and having all these emotional battles in high school, I just took to wrestling. And then, that led into, after I graduated from high school, like with the fire academy, they used to call me Showtime in the academy because like
Okay.
I wasn't like this cocky prick putting on a show, but I mean, I was pretty fit, from the wrestling and the discipline. And my thing was always like, let's go get it. Let's do it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then that led to, there's one of my, mentors, we used to call him Pony because, it was just, I don't know, just a nickname that I don't know if he had it growing up. So we used to go, we'd train on Saturdays. It was out, there'd always be a live burn on Saturday in the fire academy. So it was like some sort of, burning, training scenario. And then we'd all get out, we'd go to lunch and then we would hit the gym. Um, he used to call it like, we loved Arnold. And so we'd watch like, the pumping iron with
Yeah,
Arnold
yeah.
and, he'd call it the pony bomb drop. So we'd be lifting weights and, we'd start heavy and just go down the stack. And we'd like, do a bomb drop, do another one, And so we got into this like fitness of this competition of, okay, who can lift the most, who can move the most weights. And, that was my fitness goal for, I'd say up until about 4 years ago, 4, maybe 5 years was let's get as big as I possibly can. Let's lift and move as much weight, do all the big ego lifts, the squats, the deadlifts, the bench presses, like I remember it was like, let's bench press 4 plates. And then I got it. And then it was, let's go to 420, 450. I mean, and so I got the highest I got was like 465 on a bench. And I think it leads to like, like the push-ups and all that chest
Yeah,
work I
yeah.
was doing gave me a good, platform. About I'd say 4.5 years ago, I was getting when we'd have a fire, I would have terrible lower back pain.
Okay.
I started developing sciatica issues. Like I would have, sciatica pain down my left side, from like my lower back shooting down my left, butt cheek and down my leg. And then it got to the point where, I felt good, but I was so big that like when I would, we'd get fires, I had maybe 5 minutes of work in me, 10 minutes of work in me because I just didn't have the breath. And then my brother was actually, he was involved in a bad call and it affected him really bad, a police officer brother. And he got into the marathon training. And so he did an 8K race. It's the Shamrock Shuffle. They do it every March in Chicago. He ran it, and then he's like, "You got to try this. You got to try this." And back to like the old, the pony lifts that I call him, with my mentor who, was like Arnold. He'd be like, that whole, you run, you're gonna lose gains,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, and I fell into that. I'm like, man, that's so stupid. We're not
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that. Like, I just want to be strong. I was like, I'll diet. I'll do something. And I was probably, I think I was right around like 19% body fat, 19, 20%. And then I was looking at my brother. I remember one year, we rented a cabin in like southern Indiana in the woods, and it was his family, my family, and it was like 90 degrees. And we're walking around, and like he had his shirt off, and he's shredded up, and he's just looking like awesome. And I look at me in the one picture, and I'm holding my son, and I was looking back, and I'm like, I look big, but I look fat. I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
I got to get lean. And so then that led to, the running. And then, talking to my brother from this bad call he went on, we exchanged some stories about, some traumatic calls and, bad stuff we've been on. And that's where like, I was like, you know what, just sign up for the race. So I signed up for the 8K. The goal was literally just to finish. I mean, I had no clue, really, I wasn't a runner. I was, a lot of people I think were looking at me at the race like, what's this guy doing, man? Like, you're not going to finish.
Yeah, yeah.
And that led to back to that, do the hard thing. When your body says no, do yes. And then I was training for it. The sciatica pains came back. Finally, I was talking to a guy at the gym who was a trainer about, I was taking some BCAs as like recoveries. And he's like, how do you like that? I'm like, I feel great. I just, I was telling him I just get these back pains, and stuff. And that old hard headed attitude worked through it. Well, he did it. He did a few things with me. We worked out, and he did like a couple, not even heavy weight stuff, but what I learned is it was a posture thing from all the bench pressing and all the heavy weights. I was like punched forward like this more. So my shoulders were more forward. And then when I would do a squat without knowing, I was just leaning forward. So I wasn't in line. So it was putting that pressure, and like, and like then my hinge, for a deadlift, my hinge was off. I was just overcompensating with like, I was all trap heavy.
Okay.
And the one trainer looked at me and he's like, I remember it. He's like, just do one body weight squat. And literally I did two. And he's like, that's it. And I was like, that's what? And he's like, I see what the problem is. And so, I mean, so to go back to like, to you and like how I think this is just, it all came together for me, like, getting involved with the Strong Dad community, like meeting you, the ego of I can do this. You need that proper coaching help. And then through, I ran the 8K, my left hip was like on fire. I was limping. Well, that led to, back to what you probably already know from my hinge from being forward, that led to tight hips, tight IT bands, I was all jacked up. And so then, I learned, a foam roller became my best friend.
Okay.
The idea of, like recovery instead of like just smashing some clean protein, the idea of, have your strong days, but have those, light days where you're just doing stretch work, band work, different recovery things, because like I was doing a lot of face pulls and just to get, my shoulders loose and, get that movement back in line. And, and then that leads to, now the marathon where, I've run 2 half marathons. I've done the 8K 3 times as a race. That struggle of base building where my body would stop at like, 5 miles. Like physically, I couldn't move. And then, to be able to go back and I found out I had weak adductors, and so it's like, and like you as a personal trainer, as it's like you're like, man, you're just preaching to the choir. I could have told you that. But it's like to, to I guess to come out of that comfort zone and be a little vulnerable to go to a trainer and say, hey, I feel like I'm strong, I feel awesome, but this is a problem. And I think that's what I learned, kind of the hard way, but also just to the fact that, you know, as a man, you can be the toughest, badass dude out there. But if you're not vulnerable enough to ask for help when you need it, you will never progress to the level that you need to be at.
I love that.
And that's, what I learned through the marathon training and, all these things. And even through, like, listening to Jocko podcasts and, like, I think I said in the WhatsApp, me and my brother were able to see him and meet
That's
him,
so cool.
and just to see like a leader like that, but that idea of taking ownership in yourself, but saying, this is my problem. And if what I'm doing, like insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I look at it like, if you don't, if you try what you're trying and you're not getting the results that you're getting, you need somebody else, like for me, do a body weight squat. I'm like, man, I'm squatting, 3 plates like nothing. And he's like, yeah, but your back's hurting. So do a body weight squat. And that trainer was able to like literally just dissect my movements and see what the problem was just from literally 2 squats with no weight.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and that's led to, the idea of the transition from, it's not about strength and, squatting houses as it's about mobility and stability. And that leads to the longevity of, yeah, you're in there working, but if your body isn't in line and you're doing the proper movements in the proper form, you're actually progressing backwards instead of
Yeah,
forward.
yeah. Yeah, the weight might go up or you might look a bit bigger, but in the long term, you're causing more damage and it's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah. And, and that's where I give so much respect to, trainers like you, and I mean, honestly, to, to highlight you for a minute, it's talking a lot about me, but to build this platform and, and to take your knowledge and to be able to give it, to a community such as the Strong Dads. I mean, that's why I'm so in. And I mean, I just want to, some of my bad experiences as far as traumas and childhood stuff, like to me, it just reinforces why the world needs, a group like this and to be able to, take some of the, you say crazy stories or crazy things that have happened to, like me and some other guys that I've heard on your podcast, where, and be able to change that to, look at your problems, address them and move past them, you know, and if you can't do it on your own, which, it takes a village. So get the help,
Yeah, no, I love that. And like, it's what we like, even when you look at the Strong Dad show and the Strong Dad movement that we're building, we all understand, but not external people necessarily. But once you come into the movement, we all understand that we're not talking about physical strength. Yes, physical strength is an element of it. You need to be capable as a man to be the provider, to be the protector. Being the strong man is the physical and the mental side of things. And like you said, being able to open up and ask for that support is crucial in the development of a man. So Shawn, as we round up today's episode, because I know you've got a long run straight after this, it's getting dark here, but it's still morning with you, and I know you've got a long run.
Mhm.
What advice would you have to a struggling dad who just feels like he's losing himself physically, mentally? He can't be present with the kids. He's struggling with his weight. He's just got no motivation and no aspirations to be better. What advice would you have?
I mean, the best thing I would say is, and actually it was, I mean, back to my, main mentor of Jocko, when we saw him in Chicago, there was a similar question asked. And, he was talking about, like losing men in wars and, being the leader in charge of that. And it kind of led to this answer of, and even some of the bad calls that I've been on and, my brother had been on, and I think firefighters and police officers and military get a highlight. And I'm sorry, like I'm kind of giving you a longer answer, but
No, you carry on, buddy.
the dead answer that I'm trying to put it on is, to anybody feeling that way, we all feel that way. We are humans. There are days that I get up. I mean, even, today I worked yesterday. My mind is telling me, do not go on this run, Shawn. My mind is telling me, even with the podcast, it was like, man, just take a nap and, tell Adam, we'll try to reschedule this, and when you get in that, that mindset, and it's overwhelming, it's bills, it's the wives, it's emotions, it's the kids, it's the house, just like take a step back and realize that every man is going through this. You're not alone. And if when you think you're alone and you get pushed into those corners, that's when just negativity builds negativity. And, you go from, so do something, find whatever you can to clear your head, even if it's, like back to me, I say, I was so emotionally struggling and I felt cast out. I would just start doing push-ups, and when you start to do something, that the endorphins that get released, physically, or even just to sit, like me sitting in the woods is my other therapy. I'm not doing anything, but I'm just sitting in the woods. Doesn't even have to, harvest a deer or anything. I'm just in the woods. So find your spot and just know I go through it. I'm sure you go through it, Adam. Every man goes through this and you're not alone. And just put that in your head that this is being a man. Because if it was easy, we wouldn't have this podcast, we wouldn't have a challenge, we wouldn't have anything. And I think that's the best thing I could say. And that's, one thing, like, Jocko said, hey, it sucks. It's tough, but good. It's going to make you stronger. You're going to get through it, because that's what we're all going through at some point in our lives. We've been through that, and just keep hammering. The other guy I love is Cameron Haynes. He's a,
Oh, Hunter.
Yeah, professional bow hunter. And, his concept on hunting is, go where nobody else can go. And that's like, but back to that, keep hammering. That's what he says. And I use his quote. I'll give him all the credit for it. This is not a Shawn Hendron quote, but I love it to death. Is, the Jocko, hard work, no excuses, and good. It's a challenge. You're only going to be stronger, because I truly think that, we have to keep in that perspective, and we all lose track of, the goal. But the perspective is, hard times make strong men.
Mm-hmm.
And easy times make weak men. And so if you are going through something, hard, it's the way that God is challenging you. If you believe in God or not, I do. I have very spiritual person. Even if I have any other beliefs, but to me, it's God. God is challenging you to build you a better man. And if you're feeling these things, it's good, because it's going to make you stronger. You will get through it. And you'll look back and say, you know what, that sucked, but I'm in a better place.
I love that. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me on the Strong Dad Show, sir. I'm looking forward to continue building up the Strong Dad movement with you, because, as I said, you are an inspirational character within there. So thank you for joining. And gentlemen, I hope you found today's episode useful. I hope you found it beneficial, and I hope you took inspiration from it just like I did. So, Shawn, thank you very much. And guys, we will catch you in the next one.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate